Welcome to the Environmental Transformation Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Grady, and today's guest is Dr. Sylvia Earle, a world renowned oceanographer and marine biologist. She is the founder of Mission Blue and Deep Ocean Exploration and Research Marine Engineering Group, and she is an explorer in resident at the National Geographic Society and an author of several books. And so we're so excited to have her. She's also referred to as her Deepness, and she's got a vast amount of knowledge here. So welcome to the show, Sylvia.
I'm so glad to be on board.
Oh, well, thank you. So, I started doing some research on you, and there was a lot of content out in the market or in the web for you. But, one of the questions I was curious is like, when did you know you wanted to be a marine biologist?
Not long after I started breathing, I guess.
That's early.
I mean, as a kid, my parents went to the New Jersey shore.
Mm-hmm.
That's when I first met the ocean, actually. I think I was about 3. And of course, the ocean inspires that sense of wonder and beauty and whatever it is. But it's life in the ocean that really captured my imagination.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
it does.
That's a great point. I think whenever you're out in nature, you have a sense of just awe and just wonder, and I could see that. That's great. Well, you are recognized as one of the most influential female marine biologists in the world. And today, yeah, I'm sure there are many others, but in today's term, you are the original OG here, in female marine biologists, and lovingly referred to as her Deepness. And can you describe what it was like in the early days of your career and being like one of the leading females in this field? And what was it like?
Well, actually, there are many more women today than there were when I first tried scuba back in the 1950s. It was considered unusual for women even to want to scuba dive, let alone to become a scientist.
Mm-hmm.
And there have been times when I was greatly outnumbered, gender-wise.
Mm-hmm.
In addition to the Indian Ocean in 1964, where I was the only woman and 70 guys.
Oh, wow.
If it were turned around, I ask men sometimes, if you were to go on an expedition with 70 women and you're the only guy, would that be okay? And they usually say, yeah. It'd be all right. But I think now it has really begun to be more of not exactly a level playing field.
Mm-hmm.
But back in 1970, when I applied to be a part of an experiment living underwater, and no one really expected women to apply at all. This is before there were astronauts, and this was a program for so-called aquanauts living underwater for 2 weeks at a time. But some of us did apply, and the head of the program, James Miller, considering what to do about this, was now become kind of a hero of sorts by saying, well, half the fish are female, I guess we could put up with a few women. And they made it possible not to do what I had originally planned to do, working with some of my fellow scientists, all male.
Mm-hmm.
But we formed, at the request of the organizers, it was NASA and Department of Interior before NOAA existed, Smithsonian Institution, General Electric Company, the Navy.
Mm-hmm.
They together thought it was okay for women to come, but they didn't like the idea of men and women living together underwater. Today, no problem. But then we decided to have a women's team, and I got to be the leader of that team. So today, it's so different. It might not seem all that different to some women who very quickly reach a level and get stopped for one reason or another, but it really has changed enormously.
Well, yeah, and I'm sure that there's so many women in the field now that look up to you, and just so thankful that you were there, kind of
They usually
blazing a
look down.
trail.
They,
What's that?
they usually look down.
Well, I don't think so. I don't think so. Well, say so. What is it like being the first female chief scientist of the National Oceanic Atmosphere Administration, NOAA? What was that like? Because that was a big honor, a big post for you, I'm sure. What was that
Well, it
like?
was a great opportunity, really, to be on the inside of government instead of being just like most of us, most of the time, as citizens without the authority that comes with having a position that making decisions about how taxpayer money gets spent.
Right, right.
And I know it is the organization that embraces the Weather Service. It is ocean and atmospheric research and the fisheries, all of the nation's fisheries policy, not state policy, but of course the overarching US policy is within that department.
Mm-hmm.
And so satellites, the environmental satellites are under NOAA's jurisdiction. So for me, it was a tremendous opportunity to get a fast education on the nation and internationally as well, because science is not confined to any one place or any
Yeah.
one country. It was so the international aspect. In fact, as chief scientist in 1990, that was the time when the Persian Gulf exploded, and
Mm-hmm.
up until that time, it was the biggest oil spill in
Mm-hmm.
history, and it was deliberate. It
Yeah.
wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate action on the part of uh, Iraq to really,
Destroy the wells.
yeah, destroy Kuwait's oil wells, but they also had a huge impact on the Gulf as a whole, and that
Yeah.
impact is enduring because although superficially it looks as though the oil has gone away, but it seeps down into the sand and the
Sands.
mud, and more than that, so much killing took place so fast that those systems, everything from the tiny organisms to the equivalent of manatees, their dugongs and the seagrass meadows, it takes, they'll never go back to what they were.
Mm.
They can
Mm.
be restored to some extent, but
Mm-hmm.
it just was like a shift.
Mm.
You think about Europe after World War II, it has healed,
Oh yeah.
but it's not the same.
It's not the same. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and so what were some of the challenges maybe you faced besides, okay, that was a big challenge, obviously, working in and around that, but what was it like to be in that chief role?
I think humbling most of all because of understanding how much influence, how much impact the policies that are made actually have
Mm-hmm.
on 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 the world. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
setting the um, goals and quotas for fishing, for example. Have a, I felt then, and even more strongly as time goes by, that we're really extracting far too much out of the ocean. At the same time,
Mm-hmm.
using the ocean as a dump site, and not
Yeah.
really respecting the ocean, but to face the challenge of trying to shift policy is really
Mm-hmm.
hard because it's driven by habits, it's driven by expectations, it's largely driven by money.
Money, politicians. I mean, there's a lot involved in that, I'm sure, right? I imagine that was a difficult challenge to maneuver those uh,
Yeah,
those issues, right?
and I don't. The problems were not so much gender related. It was just the problems that are inherent in undertaking that that responsibility, that role.
Sure. Wow. Now you stayed in that role for a couple years,
Mm-hmm.
and then you said, I think I want to go out and do something on my own and have a bigger impact and a different voice.
Well, it's both. Well, to have a responsible role in the government gives you not just perspective, but opportunities to make a difference on a larger scale in some ways than you can as an individual. But you're also constrained, at least as a presidential appointee. I was told I had to be a team player, which meant
Mhm.
you're,
You had to watch what you say or do. You couldn't quite
close.
step out of
Yeah,
line if
and
you
that
had
was
an opposing opinion.
really hard, especially with respect to fisheries issues. I went to a
Uh-huh.
fisheries council meeting where I learned that 90% of the bluefin tuna in the North Atlantic were gone. And this was 1990. And that is in 20 years. The population were so good at killing them, taking them, marketing them, eating them, that 90% were gone. And I
Mm.
said, whoa, if we can do that in 20 years, what's our goal? Are we trying to exterminate them? Because if we are, we're doing a great
We're
job. We
doing,
only got
yeah.
10% left to go. And
Wow.
that's when they started calling me the Sturgeon General. And
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah.
they didn't
I
let me
did
go
see
to
that
paper
name.
meetings.
They were like, wait a minute, that's
Yeah,
opposed to our economic fishing
there's a
economy here.
heavy um, impact. Oh, it's largely, money driven by those the commercial fishing interests have a
Right.
big say in this nation's policy about the ocean. They just do.
Yeah, no, and I think that'd be a big challenge, I mean, just it's like turning the Titanic in a sense, or it's a big ship to turn around to get a decision made. I mean, it's like it takes long time to turn the tide
But once you
of
nudge it,
decision.
if you can nudge it even a little
It
bit,
it can get some,
eventually
yeah,
the impact is huge. And
yeah,
I like to think that I've done some nudging both from the inside
and the
while
outside.
at NOAA and certainly since then.
Oh yeah, well let's talk about this. Let's talk about your Mission Blue organization, and share with the listeners what that's all about, and maybe a little bit about what hope spots are. I kind of was interested to learn more about hope spots.
In 2009, I was given the TED Prize that comes with a wish. You're supposed to make a wish big enough to change the world. And my wish was to ignite public support for campaign, new submarines, ocean research, exploration, but the goal to establish a network
Hmm.
of areas in the ocean
Hmm.
that would be protected, hope spots large enough to save and restore the blue heart of the planet, the ocean.
Hmm.
It is really articulate. A I articulated something that I've been passionate about, I suppose, starting maybe in the 1970s when it was obvious, even then, that what we were putting into the ocean and what we're taking out of the ocean was not only changing the nature of the ocean, but changing the nature of the
Hmm.
whole world. The
Hmm.
ocean drives climate and weather. It's home for most of life on Earth. And our ability to change the chemistry of the ocean by what we're putting in and what we're taking out is changing everything. And so,
I don't know if people quite understand the relationship of the ocean with our daily existence, and
that's
how
right, we
much.
don't.
Right. How much is, how much that contributes to the air we breathe. And, there's so much, you know, air and oxygen being produced through photosynthesis through all of these, undersea, uh, you know, algae and plant life that it's helping, us in, the atmosphere. And I don't think people understand that relationship.
But once you know, you can't unknow. Once you see it, it's a part of you. And
Right.
children learn. a lot that wasn't available to know when I was a kid. Like what does Earth look like from space?
Hmm.
The world is blue. Um, they are beginning to understand basic things such as the fact that the ocean drives climate and weather.
Hmm.
The greatest diversity and abundance of life on Earth is out there in the sea. It's not in schools everywhere, and it's not part of the basic knowledge that most people have, but we're getting there. We know more people now are aware than ever before. And once it becomes truly integrated into our thinking, the way we learn our numbers, we learn our alphabet, whatever
Hmm.
language you speak, it starts somewhere, you learn a language.
Right.
But we need to learn the language of nature to
Yeah.
realize that we're a part of it, not apart from it.
Right.
And that what we
Right.
do to the natural world, especially the ocean, really determines our existence and the quality, not just the quality of life, but the nature of life itself.
Yeah, pretty powerful stuff when you really start to connect the dots. I mean, and I think that's part of the challenge is connecting the dots for people to see
That's right.
the symbiotic relationship of all this together, because if we keep taking things away, it's going to affect us somewhere else. And right
Just imagine
now,
your computer if you just start stripping it sort of blindly, just taking big chunks of it out. And you think
yeah.
90% of the sharks, 90% of the tunas, the swordfish, there's been a drop in squid, in shrimp, in lobsters, you name it, across the web of life,
Hmm.
and many other forms of life that are destroyed in the process of taking those that we
One.
ultimately wind up in the marketplace. So
Yeah.
it's I in 2020, the what some people refer to as the anthropause, where humans sort of hit the
The pause button.
yeah, pause button. And I actually spent that time plus a bit before thinking about these things and trying to figure out how to say what we're talking about
Hmm.
in the book that National Geographic asked me to produce. It's called Ocean, a Global Odyssey. And I learned a lot in the process of gathering the up to date information. First of all, about sort of simple sounding questions like where did the ocean come from? Well, debated where the ocean has, where all that water arrived. And and what I did was to try to assemble the most up to date thinking about the formation of the ocean, formation of Earth, the beginning of life itself. And so a lot of it is kind of nerdy in the first part, but they're kid-like questions that
Right.
that, that you might want to know and might want to know how we know. So I tried to fill in those blanks. And then the second part is about who lives in the ocean. And of
Uh-huh.
course, people think, oh, whales, sharks, fish. But there's a lot more.
Oh,
All
yeah.
those animals I just named are all vertebrates. And when you think they all have a backbone, with sharks, it's a cartilaginous backbone, but nonetheless, they're in the same big group that most people think of as life on Earth. They're certainly
Hmm.
animals,
Hmm.
and and yet the greatest diversity and abundance of life still it's in the ocean. There may be 35 big divisions of life, and sharks. I mean, all the fish, all the mammals, all the birds, all the amphibians, all of the reptiles together make up one small group.
Hmm.
And the 30 plus others are all in the ocean. Only about half of them have representation on the land. So this book aims to celebrate that. There's like some books you can open up and you see a double page spread. Well, we did more. We did a big fold out,
Oh,
double
okay.
sided. And the vertebrates occupy one little corner.
Hmm.
Amazing diversity of life. The jellyfish, the starfish, variations on the theme of so-called worms. There are flatworms and arrow worms and polychaete worms and you
Yeah.
know, but each one occupying kind of a separate place. And then finally, and this is the part you probably will dive into first, might say, oh, so how does the ocean affect humans? And how do humans affect the ocean? And here are the problems. And so, what are we going to do about it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
Well, that's important. I mean, what are we going to do about it? And I think, through Mission Blue organization, you're really pushing the envelope there with these types of issues. Obviously, your book is going to do wonders for the average person who wants to learn about this, who's intrigued about. I've always been fascinated by the sea and the ocean. As a kid, I grew up in Florida,
oh,
in the Orlando area, and we'd always went to New Smyrna Beach or Daytona Beach, on the weekends with the family, and spent a little time on the golf side too, and I enjoyed the Matter of fact, I like the golf side better than the Atlantic side, but it's just one of those things. But I've always been a water guy, and I think that love of the ocean, probably more like you. I ended up going into in college a biology major. I mean,
mm,
that's so. I loved it, and I gravitated toward it, and it allowed me to, I quickly understood, the connections between, the various forms of life. And I mean, if you've ever scuba dived or snorkeled in the ocean and has it been able to see the, aqua life, so to speak, in there, it's fascinating. It's amazing, and you just wonder, wow, there's so
well,
much majesty down there.
the Florida Gulf Coast is actually one of the hope spots. Not all
Okay.
hope spots are as large as that.
Uh huh.
Some of them are small, but there are others that are even somewhat larger,
Mm-hmm.
like the Sargasso Sea,
Mm-hmm.
a huge chunk of the ocean. But nations are coming together to really offer greater protection than had been afforded before. For the same for the reasons I've been articulating, is people really understand the importance of the ocean to every breath you take, every drop of water you drink.
Mm-hmm.
You're more inclined to care about it, knowing that your
Right.
life depends on it.
Right. Right. When I was reading your preface and your foreword in the book that's coming out, one of the things that kind of struck me was, you know, a lot of people have this notion that the ocean's too big to fail,
Right.
right? And
A
like
problem.
we can just keep pulling anything out of it. We can dump whatever we want in. It's going to be, it's going to, replenish itself. And I don't know at this point that that's not really the case anymore. I mean, we're doing more damage to the oceans than people realize. And reason people don't understand or realize is because they're not there, right? They're not going out into the sea and seeing the firsthand the situation. And I think it's people like you and other ocean, marine biologists and people who are showing people this is going to be what makes hearts and minds change.
Well, there are now millions of divers who can not only go into the sea but share the view, and they do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They That's the good news. The not so good news is you can only go to maybe 30 or 40 or 50 meters, and then time runs out. The physiological conditions make it impossible to go much deeper or stay much longer. But you get an hour passport at maybe 20 meters.
Yeah.
The deeper you go, the less time you have until you reach that
You
point where
you got to go back up real
yeah,
fast, huh?
you have to, limited time. But um, the average depth of the ocean is like 2.5 miles, about where the Titanic is. Scuba divers don't go there,
Yeah, you
and the
can't.
maximum depth is 7 miles. So developing the technologies, the submersibles, the underwater robots,
Well,
it's been
yeah,
another big piece of my life
yeah.
because
Talk about that because that was interesting. That's part of your DO, or is it
yeah,
Door
deep
project? Yeah, talk about that.
exploration and research
Yeah.
that my daughter and son-in-law own and operate now. But It had a predecessor, Deep Ocean Engineering, that I co-founded, and the whole idea is to advance better access to the sea so we can understand it and therefore be able to take care of it. Right
Mm-hmm.
now,
Mm-hmm.
in ignorance, we're using trawls to catch fish. It's
Mm-hmm.
like using a, like a bulldozer to catch songbirds. You
Mm-hmm.
destroy the forest and you shake out a few things that you want to take to eat, and everything else you throw away.
Mm,
And that's what happens with these trawls, shrimp trawls in the Gulf of Mexico.
mm.
As a scuba diver, you might have seen, because you can see in some of the areas where shrimpers go, it looks like it's just been bulldozed.
Ripped apart.
Literally. You take everything, you go back years later, and the scars are still there.
Mm.
It doesn't just heal overnight at all. And anyway,
But
so
are we really? I mean, how close to failure do you think we are if we continue down this path where we're harvesting is the fish like never before, and we're polluting the oceans, like never before? I mean, like the great garbage patch out in the Pacific Ocean. I mean,
the whole
I
ocean is a big garbage patch. Come on.
right now, I mean, right. I mean, it's getting worse, right? I mean, it's more obvious, but there is a big one floating out there that's
Yeah.
pretty significant too, right?
Yep, but it's true in the Atlantic where these big gyres form. The Sargasso Sea is another example. The floating material gets caught in the large circular currents and just
Mm,
goes round and round and gets sort of trapped and has a magnified appearance. But all that stuff ultimately sinks. It's not just at the surface; it's throughout the water column.
mm-hmm,
And as it breaks down into smaller bits, even to the new term is nanoplastics. They're
mm-hmm,
microscopic and they're so small that they're easily swept up in the wind and in the air we breathe, in the water we drink, in the food we eat, especially when you eat wild animals from the sea like tuna and swordfish and halibut and shrimp, because they don't have a choice. They're just swimming in this stuff
mm-hmm.
and inhaling it. So it's it is a problem, but the bigger problem would be if we didn't know. But we
Right,
do know. We are
right.
armed with knowledge. We have this superpower called knowledge,
Yeah, yeah. We
and
can do something about it.
we can do something about it. And having large areas protected, where you leave the fish in place, you don't use them as deliberate dump sites, and you really do your best to give nature a break. And
Right,
when you do, you, well, as I say, you can't go back to what was, but you can certainly make them better, make these areas, make the whole world better than it currently is.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
One place, one action, all of these actions, all these every individual, either by doing something or not doing something, you're making a difference. So if you get enough people doing something that's right, it really does add up. It really
Right.
does when you think about
Yeah.
it.
Little by little, we're all taking little steps. It does
Little
add
bites.
up, right?
You think of all the little bites people take out of the ocean with a tuna fish sandwich or salad or squid or whatever it is. I'd so much rather see these wild animals stay in the ocean. We don't eat
Mm-hmm.
sunbirds anymore. What are we doing eating their equivalent from the sea? Now, if you really are hungry and you don't have choices, that's one thing. But that's not what is causing 90% of the tuna to be gone.
Right,
It's
right,
we take them on an industrial scale, market
right.
them all over the world, have a huge carbon footprint, and leaving great holes in the ocean, if you will.
Oh yeah, I mean, you're right. And I think that, you know, technology today has really brought another level of awareness. I
Yes.
mean, talk about like again, you were kind of one of the trailblazers creating, the Deep Ocean Exploration Research Group to design these submarines that I could go down into the sea and I could
Yeah,
see and video record and test things. And
so simple, even a scientist can do it.
I
I
mean,
mean,
it's amazing.
right. I mean, there's some people think you ought to be afraid going down into the ocean, but once you're there, you say, well, this is great. This is beautiful. Why did I not
Mm,
do this before?
yeah.
And whether it's
Yeah.
snorkeling or scuba diving or venturing forth in a little submarine, and we're trying with the DOER, Deep Ocean Exploration and Research, to really advance democratization of access to the sea. I want little kids to be able to go down and from the earliest time, just understand that the most of life on Earth actually lives in the dark.
Hmm.
You get below, and not just at night, but when you
Right. You get this below the sun. The sun won't penetrate the ocean, the depths of the ocean anymore. I mean, there's still
or
life
even
down
at
there.
100 feet, it's darker. Everything looks blue. And the
Yeah.
deeper you go, the darker it gets until the sunlight doesn't penetrate below 1,000 feet or so. And the even in the clearest ocean water, and some places it's like 10 feet, depending on where you are.
True. It's
but
true.
but a lot of the action photosynthesis is up there in the surface waters, but there are alternative methods for generating food that we really didn't think about much until the late 1970s, and that's called chemosynthesis. In the depths of the sea and even in marshes, that there are organisms, mostly bacteria, but some in a different kingdom of life called the archaea that look a lot like bacteria, but are
Hmm.
very different. There's different from one another, whether it's a bacterium from a microbe known as an archaean, as let's say, I don't know, cows are from mushrooms, I suppose.
Well, that's interesting. I was reading that your algae study is pretty legendary in the Gulf of Mexico that you did your doctorate thesis on. You actually identified many species of algae that no one really knew about before, and many of those are in the Smithsonian Institute. Talk a little bit about that. I think that was pretty interesting.
Well, it was really exciting as a kid scientist to take on a project to get to know the nature of the various algae and seagrasses that live in the Gulf of Mexico.
Hmm.
And I was at Duke University, undertook this project, and I was told it was overly ambitious. But that didn't really discourage me, and I'm still working on it, actually. So it was overly ambitious.
It's a lifelong ambition.
It is. But it really, over a 10-year period, because there are two children, I got married and a lot of things in between. So I didn't stay anchored in school for that whole time. But from between 1956 and 1966, master's and PhD, both at Duke, um, I managed to spend quite a lot of time, often on my own, um, because I didn't know about writing grants and things to support scientific research. But going out along the whole coast from the Mississippi Delta all the way down to the Florida Keys and hitching a ride when I could with fishermen who would take me out with them and tell me
Hmm.
what they dragged to the surface in nets. And that's when I began scuba diving seriously too. And went out with Navy divers from Panama City,
Okay.
doing things then that you couldn't do today because of all the security concerns. But no, they just let me go along with them. And that's really when I seriously learned how to scuba dive, by watching the Navy divers and coming back alive all the time.
Well, that's yeah, yeah. But the diversity of algae and species you identified and found Had to be fair. I mean, really amazing. I mean, just like fascinating.
Well, it was because before then, well, the studies had been made before. There's a really well worn copy of a book about the Gulf of Mexico, its origin, waters, and marine life that was published in 1954. And that was my Bible for knowing about the nature of the Gulf of Mexico. I went to St. Petersburg College when it was a junior college
Mm-hmm.
in the 50s, and then went to Florida State for my bachelor's degree,
Mm-hmm.
55, and then to Duke, and raced through getting a master's degree in a year in 56.
Wow.
And then uh, all this time, really looking at the Gulf of Mexico and trying to understand what was beneath the surface. And most of what was known was done from ships or from the seaweeds, the marine algae, and the seagrasses were mostly done by walking along the shore, wading in the shallow water, but not diving. Scuba didn't really
Mm-hmm.
exist very
Mm-hmm.
widely. A few people were. I first tried scuba in 1953. I had 2 words of instruction. You'll love this if you're a scuba diver. My words of instruction were breathe naturally. Hey, that was it. That's about all we knew.
Yeah.
I I got a little more sophisticated over the 10-year period and still get more sophisticated all the time with the new technologies that now with underwater robots and autonomous underwater vehicles that can survey wide areas. But even just using scuba, it was a quantum shift in terms of what people knew about the nature of seaweeds and other forms of life in the Gulf of Mexico. Because as a scientist, you could, or anybody, a witness, you could actually go there,
Mm-hmm.
see fish swimming in something other than lemon slices and butter. You know,
Mm-hmm.
seeing them in their own turn. That's when I first began to realize that fish are individuals, that you could recognize differences among barracuda and sharks. You know, Jane Goodall made history by living for 15 years, day and night, with chimpanzees and getting to know them as individuals, their faces, their behavior, not just that there's a chimpanzee that you know is different from a from another form of great ape,
Mm-hmm.
but every one different. She gave them names. I got to see that fish, like humans and cats and dogs and chimpanzees, they're all different.
Mm-hmm.
That was a breakthrough.
Oh, wow, that's amazing. You know, one of the things that I had a lot of enjoyment of, I was in Panama and we got to go snorkeling and we got to go at night and go see the
Mm.
bioluminescent algae down there. We were snorkeling and and the phytoplankton too. And just to just see those when you're swimming and you go like this and everything lights up like it's,
Uh,
fireworks. And you're like, oh my gosh. It was just amazing. And I thought, wow, this is one of the coolest things I've ever seen.
excuse me.
It was really good. I enjoyed it, and I'm sure finding some algae like that you're like, wow, I never saw that before. Was pretty special. Um,
So little, excuse me, of the ocean has really been explored.
yeah, I'll bet. I
We're
mean,
just beginning to understand the big discovery, the magnitude of our ignorance.
right? Yeah, it's like I didn't know. Yeah, we didn't know. But again, I think
We still don't
technologies.
know.
Yeah, and technology's helping us learn that. I mean, even more. I mean, like the engineering work that you've done with the submarines and other things like technology that's coming into play, so you can get down. Talk about your Google Map uh, involvements of the Google Ocean mapping the ocean. I thought that was pretty fascinating. I think listeners might like to hear that.
If you haven't used Google Earth, and a lot of people have at this point, to be able to be like an astronaut, you're there high in the sky looking at the world, and you can sort of dive in. You can go through space and wind up at a place that you decide that you want to be. You
Mm-hmm.
can go see the national parks. You can go to cities around the world. You can go to your backyard. You can go to your neighbor's backyard. You
Mm-hmm.
can find Starbucks. But what until Google got serious and started looking seriously at the ocean, everything was terrestrial. I attended a conference with the person who brought Google Earth to Google. It was kind of a secret um, project of the U.S. government
Mm-hmm.
known as Keyhole. That when it became open to the public, what John Hankey, the then head of the organization, did, and uh, acquired by Google, and the whole Google Earth um, approach. Anyway, we were at a meeting simultaneously. Each of us had to give a talk, and I got to say how much I love. Well, I was talking about the ocean, but John Hankey was sitting right in the front in the audience. So I looked at him, and then I was inspired to say that how much I love Google Earth. But I just said it. I probably shouldn't have, but I did say you should call it Google Dirt because it's all about the land.
Right.
And afterwards, I mean, Hankey could have been annoyed. He could have whatever. He he said it was like getting stabbed in the heart. And he said, you're right. Something has been missing from Google Earth. And I couldn't resist saying, yeah, most of it's missing. Most of it's the ocean. It's
Yeah,
95
like 90 some percent of it, right? It's missing.
of the biosphere where creatures live. It's the ocean. Even the surface, it's like 2/3 of it is ocean. And so he invited me to go down to the Googleplex and meet the Googlers and see what could be done to fix Google Earth. And 3 years later, we actually launched the ocean in Google Earth. And it was in 2009. And it was spectacular. It was the same time that the predecessor to the book, the National Geographic book that is coming out this November, it's called Ocean. It was an atlas of the ocean, again, National Geographic, that was a great education in itself. And
Mm-hmm.
that's also the same week that I got the TED Prize. And it all kind of came together in one glorious mashup. The launching of the ocean in Google Earth, where you
Wow.
could actually start from high in the sky and then come down and go into the ocean and get little snapshots of what it's like, who lives there. And
Mm-hmm.
we are not arbitrarily. I think it was a challenge to figure out what places could we name. Just think about would be special places that we could refer to as hope spots. When the ocean in Google Earth launched, we
Mm-hmm.
had 12 places,
Mm.
sort of no brainers. Who wouldn't want to save the Galapagos Islands?
Yeah, I was getting ready to say that one. Right. Right.
And then
Right.
it's like SOC was one such area, the polar regions, the Arctic, the Antarctic.
Mm-hmm.
Little country of Palau is legendary. As a diver, you probably know about Palau and
I've
how
heard
special
about
it
it.
is. Yeah,
Yeah.
and anyway, so we featured that, and then making my wish to embrace the world with a network of hope spots. Now, none of these hope spots are protected. San Francisco Bay is an example. It's a hope spot, but it's not
It's
exactly
it's not
pristine
exactly
either.
pretty. Yeah. No, I know. It's
But it can
beautiful.
be better than it is. The
Right.
idea is to enlist champions and through them to work locally with communities of
Mm-hmm.
whether it's a small community or like San Francisco, it's pretty
That's a
large.
big, yeah, they've got a lot of,
People who
supporters
get
there.
involved, right?
Right.
The goal is okay, what have we got? Where are we? How can we improve? Not only what is thought to be the condition of a place, but even knowing about it, let's do an inventory. Let's find out who lives here.
Mm-hmm.
Let's share the view with as many people as possible, and track change over time. And to
Mm-hmm.
do this, we've begun working with Esri, the
Mm-hmm.
the environmental.
GIS mapping
That's
company.
right.
Yeah.
They do layers of data. They, like Google, had started out focusing on the land, but now they're zooming into the ocean, uh, literally
Mm-hmm.
going into areas that we're getting data, getting images, getting information, and sharing stories. So every hope spot is being um,
Mapped.
blessed, yeah, mapped, and
Mm-hmm.
have a story map that is filled with information, but also where people can share their experiences.
Oh, that's
You have a
amazing. I mean,
problem? Here's what we do about it. And then somebody else has a problem somewhere else. Here's what we do about it. And you've got this network of hope growing around the world.
well,
That's that's each chapter of the Global Odyssey book is has it features one of the hope spots. So they're actually
okay,
only 11 chapters. So we just do a small
right.
representation out
That's
of
going to be
now
great.
140 places around the world
Oh,
are named
okay.
as spots.
Now I saw that you designated a big spot, a big protected area near Hawaii or in the Hawaiian Islands area,
Yes.
or no, Midway area, right?
Well, the Papauamakuakea,
Yeah.
Northwest Hawaiian Islands, was it's been a place that has been noticed through many administrations over the years. Even Theodore Roosevelt did something to benefit the birds that nest there. But over the years, the sensitivity to this as a special place has has actually grown. But it was George W. Bush who, with the stroke of his pen, designated out 50 miles from not just the land, but going out 50 miles with a high level of protection. Even the fish, even the lobsters, even the squid are safe
Mm-hmm.
because of this action as a national marine monument.
Mm.
And then fast forward to 2016, and President Obama quadrupled the size of it, taking it all the way out to the edge of the exclusive economic zone, 200 miles
Nice.
from shore. And so, as a hope spot, it's just trying to alert the public at large, as well as the Hawaiian local
Look,
citizens, people
yeah.
who are closest to the reserve, to continue to support full protection. It's so easy to see what looks like great abundance and say, what's wrong with taking a ton or
Okay.
two or six
Yeah.
or 100?
Mm-hmm.
The ocean
Mm-hmm.
is so resilient. But now we know we have the evidence. Uh,
Yeah.
in 50 years, we have taken so much out of the ocean and we put so much into the ocean, changing through what we're putting into the atmosphere as well as into the ocean, the climate, the chemistry of the planet. Half the coral reefs are gone or in a state of decline through actions that we have taken that seem to be, well, who cares? We can take the grouper. We're not going to harm the coral, but we'll take the fish. Huh, not realizing that the corals need the fish. The fish
Mm.
need the
Yeah,
coral.
they work together.
Yeah, it's a system,
Right.
and it's a really tightly knit community. So taking the lobsters out of coral reefs, you degrade the system and make them more vulnerable to
Right.
climate change and to the acidification of the ocean. It's as if we're doing everything possible to make the planet inhospitable for us.
Yeah, unlivable, right. It's like we're like, slowly painstakingly killing ourselves.
We're killing the planet that we live
Yeah. Right. I mean,
Yeah.
climate change is such a big topic in society right now, and I think there's it's never before had such a big awareness in society right now. Companies are really making big commitments to carbon emission reductions. I think people who are in the financial markets are seeing a big change in the way people are buying shares and investing in companies. They want global environmental change, and I
Mhm.
think that that's really you know making an impact. And I think now we're at an opportunity where some of these changes and things like you've been advocating for years are starting to kind of really take foot and really having more meaningful representation in society. What's your take on what you see currently happening right now in society? Oh, as awareness wise.
Right. Well, plenty of reason for optimism. I think you can get really depressed really fast, but if you stay there, if you think there's no hope, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy because you'll just give up.
Hmm.
And well, I keep saying we can't go back even 5 years, let alone 500. But we can, by starting right now, this minute, do something this hour, this day, to move in the right direction. And you get 8 billion people moving in that direction, even with little things, it adds up. What do you do with your trash? What choices do you make about what to eat or not? What to wear or not? How to travel? We have choices every day, and they're sometimes subtle. But once you know, and if you make conscious decisions about what, well, take the matter of consuming ocean wildlife. That's a choice.
Oh yeah.
It's really hard to justify eating tuna as a necessity.
Hmm.
I like to do it, but you don't need to do it. You might think it's good for you, but when you really think it through, it's not good for the ocean, so it's not good for you. And when you think further about what that tuna has been eating and accumulating as a top predator, a fish that eats other fish that finally gets down to the phytoplankton, you're accumulating the very things you don't want that have accumulated in the tuna that you don't want in you.
Right.
Right up the food chain. They call it bioaccumulation. And we don't eat top predators that we grow from the land, but even so, we get things in the animals that we eat that we really don't want in you. But consider an animal that eats an animal that eats an animal that eats an animal. We're talking about sometimes 10 or 20 steps to get to what goes into a tuna, and bioaccumulation all the way. These high levels,
Mm.
not just mercury, although that's a famous one, but now we're looking even at the nanoplastics making their way up through the food chain, and so tiny that at the molecular level they go right through the membranes of cells.
Well, there's other emerging contaminants now that are out there called the PFAS chemicals, are the perfluoroalkyl.
Right.
Those are big bioaccumulating forever chemicals that don't break down, and they've got toxic, cancerous type properties that if you ingest them and they bioaccumulate enough, they're a big problem. And the sea life and aquatic life are exposed to these too when they're being dumped in
They
the
can't escape.
rivers and streams.
They can't escape.
Yeah.
Like we can't escape what's in the air. We breathe it. I mean, you can wear a mask, and that may help to
Right.
screen out some of the things that you don't want
Pollutants.
to
Right.
do. But
Right.
the
No, I think though that the awareness of environmental awareness now is really at front of mind in most. Um, I'd call them the millennials, the Gen Zs, most Gen Xers in the world. I think some of the baby boomers are kind of like, well, we're almost done at the end of the life here, but there's still some there that have a lot of awareness. But right now, I think we're at a precipice where more people are now concerned about environmental sustainability, recycling, being, just being living more greener in life, and what can I do?
I know some crusty CEOs who say, I'm not going to worry about my kids or grandkids. They'll take care of themselves. Like, and I say, imagine if all of your predecessors just lived with that attitude, that it wasn't, did not live with a concern about leaving the world a better place, about the world that your kids are going to inherit.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Fortunately, I think it's more general for people to care about wanting their kids and grandkids, at least, those they can know and love and see the future through their eyes, that our, I think our society has prospered, our civilization has prospered because we learn things and pass it along. Learn things, pass it along. Each generation acquiring new knowledge, new information that
Right.
has caused us to reach this great, amazing level of prosperity and influence and power. But for the first time, we have enough knowledge to be able to see as never before what our predecessors could not. That consuming the planet as a means of fostering our prosperity, cutting the
Mm-hmm.
trees,
Mm-hmm.
4 feet of lumber, consuming the fish, the Lewis and Clark expeditions going back in the 1800s. I mean, that was really designed to find new ways to open commerce across the country. They killed the animals to bring back furs, the skins, the hides of bears and wolves and
Mm-hmm.
beavers and you name it. Everything was, quotes, fair game. And we honor those early explorers for what they discovered and the way they communicated their discoveries. But when you think about it today,
Mm-hmm.
it was pretty brutal.
Yeah.
And conquering the people who lived there, thinking of them as,
Yeah.
something to be taken over,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
consumed, as, and I think we are really at a crossroads that has never been possible before because we have a level of knowledge that is unprecedented.
Yeah.
I think of this as the sweet spot in time. It's an engineering term, it's just right. Never before could we do this, and never again will we have a chance. If we go too far, we'll lose the chance.
Mm-hmm.
Dying right where we are, armed with what we now know, we can embrace the living world with new understanding. And another reason for me to be really optimistic is look at 2020. Can we change? We did change.
We did.
And
Yeah.
overnight, people, when they realized my life depends on taking a different approach. And what happened? I
We
mean,
all we all adjusted. We all
and I'm
adjusted and
still
we all we refocused our priorities. We
right.
slowed down a little bit. We enjoyed our families more. We started thinking more sustainable in life. I mean, I know my wife and I did. I mean, you realize that you didn't need to drive your car an hour to work one way every day. You could just stay at home and
We can
Zoom
make
on.
decisions. We can
Right.
choose not to eat tuna when you know that it's
Yeah.
good for you. We can
Yeah.
stop smoking when you know it's not good for you. You can wear a mask. You can get vaccinated when you know your life depends on it, and
Right.
your community will benefit if you do these simple things. And
Yeah.
so, why am I cautiously optimistic? I know the things that we thought were preposterous would never change. We'll never do that, and we certainly couldn't do it. One would think on the scale, the time scale that will be effective. Gradually we're learning that we got to take care of nature. We have to be
Mm-hmm.
careful about what we put in the water and into the sky, or what we take out of the ocean. And we have policies to protect wild birds because we value their role in keeping the planet safe. It keeps us safe. But you know, we can, when we know that our lives and our prosperity, that our health, our
Depends.
security are
Mm-hmm.
truly at risk unless we change our habits. And largely these are habits born of a time when we thought we could get away with doing whatever we wanted to the
Right.
air, the water, and to the wild animals,
Yeah.
especially in the ocean.
Yeah, and I think people are realizing that's not happy. You can't do that anymore. And I had a guest on, probably 6 months or so ago. He wrote a book. Is Tom Bowman's his name? He wrote a book. What if solving the climate crisis was simple? And that the big the big uh, you know idea here is stop using fossil fuels is one of the biggest. Like if we can just stop using fossil fuels, that would be the number one easiest way to get there sooner rather than later, because we're not going to
But, but if
emit
we
the CO2.
but if we only do that, we won't solve the problem.
Well, that's true, because there's multiple facets to this part of
Well,
the equation, but that's a big one.
securing, securing the natural systems that got Earth to a place that makes it habitable for us in the first place, healing the harm, safeguarding what we can of what remains of wild places, and restoring what we can, and to do it as if our lives depend on it, because actually they do.
They do. Yeah.
I mean,
No, you bring up a good point. And I think is part of the equation that most people aren't thinking about as far as restoring, climate. It is saving the oceans and protecting our
it's where most of the
wildlife
carbon
there.
goes.
Yeah, right. And one thing that really, being an environmental scientist and recognizing climate change really is happening, but always kind of thinking, well, there's a lot of countries that are doing it worse than we're doing it. And I thought at times, and I admit it, it's like, well, we're regulated pretty heavily in our country as far as industry. It was pretty good, but I realized, what, we got to do everything we can do.
Mhm.
And Tom mentioned to me, he goes, Sean, I was meeting with a company and a lady, and she says, it's real. The climate crisis is really bad. She goes, we're measuring the temperature of the ocean, at thousands of feet deep, and the average temperature has increased to like 2.5 degrees, over a period of time. I can't remember the time, but it was like, okay. And she goes, and at depths of 3,000 feet or something, that's the temperature that's changing because the earth is warming so much. And I was like, holy cow, that is massive. Because when you think of the size of the ocean heating up that much,
Right.
that's a problem. And then it was like, oh my gosh, everything we can do, it doesn't matter what we do, but it all needs to be in that green lens, that green decision of, is it the right decision to not eat fish, or not use single use plastics, or go walk to the stores, or ride your bike instead of driving your car, things like that. I mean, it started to really kind of resonate more and more with me. And I was like, wow. And I think more and more people are starting to realize we have to make changes.
And it's not hard. In fact,
Right.
you should just think of how much fun it is
Yeah, embrace it. Have fun with it, right?
to be part of that generation that safeguards the world forevermore. You
Yeah.
don't want to be part of the generation that loses the chance.
Yeah.
And in the lifetime of your kids and grandkids, looking back at us and saying, why didn't you do something? You
Right.
knew, and you just kept doing the same old things because it was convenient, or because you thought nobody's going to tell me what to do, or what to eat, or
Mm-hmm.
what to wear, or where to
Mm-hmm.
go, or how I go there. To really feel the joy of having the inside track on knowing what nobody could know before, that are, going back, the smartest people who lived before the 1950s did not know what Earth looked like from space. Well, before the 70s, really,
Mm-hmm.
because it just wasn't possible. Now it is. It wasn't possible to go to the deepest part of the ocean and and witness life all the way down. It wasn't possible to. It's just now beginning to be possible to pull bits and pieces of information together, to look at the patterns, to make the connections. As you say, why should I care about the ocean? Now we have evidence. We can connect the dots. We can follow the carbon, which is critical to the the climate and
Mm-hmm.
carbon in the atmosphere that is released from not just from burning fossil fuels, not just from burning forests and clear cutting forests, but clear cutting the ocean. When you take the hundreds of millions of tons of wildlife out of the ocean, krill from Antarctica, squid from just about everywhere, tuna across the globe, all that carbon, every living thing is a carbon based.
Right.
You
Yep.
are, of course, I am. Microbes are, it's all, we're all carbon. I mean, as as Spock says to Captain Kirk, let's go find carbon-based units, Captain. For life elsewhere in the universe. And
Yeah.
here we know where to look. It's all around us.
Yeah.
And
Uh,
when you follow the carbon and realize that consuming a wild fish means you've done your part to break the links. And by not consuming them, you're doing your part. It might seem like a tiny thing, but imagine if 8 billion people, or even a billion, even a million, start this understanding that keeping the carbon in the forests, in the soil, in the ocean is on the balance. It's if we don't do that, even if we stop emitting carbon from burning fossil fuels, it won't save us because if we continue to destroy the natural system,
it's not going to help either, right? Yeah, absolutely.
four
But
and a half billion years to get here, it's only taken us maybe 4.5 decades to significantly unravel those
yeah.
systems.
Well, so one of my childhood memories is watching Mutual Omaha
Oh yeah,
Wildlife. I used to love watching those shows. And the other one was the Jacques Cousteau, documentaries. And I was curious, did you get to work with Jacques Cousteau at all in your time? He seemed, I
I
bet he,
certainly met him and enjoyed thoughtful conversations, but we never got to dive together. But I have been diving with his son, Jean
hmm
Michel,
hmm
and with his at least one of his grandkids. Um, and we, I remember hearing Jacques Cousteau say, it was in his last year, 1997, it was a big conference in Orlando. I was sitting next to him, and he said, that I, I, I cannot take my children to places that I knew as a child. He was thinking about the ocean, the Mediterranean Sea. It
hmm
changed so much in his lifetime.
mm,
The next day, talking with Jean Michel, that I can't take my kids to see what I saw as
right.
a child. So we're
Yeah.
living in this time of exceptional transformation of the natural systems that once everybody thought of as the way it would always be.
hmm
But in literally a few decades, we have we have had a greater impact, a greater era of loss in a shorter period of time than anything in human civilization. The flip side of that is we've also learned more in a shorter period of time than during any other, during all of preceding human history.
Mm,
What,
that's great. That's amazing.
what
You
we
know, go
what we
ahead.
know that we couldn't know in the 1950s, even 10 years ago, what we now know. It's exhilarating.
Right. It's exciting. I mean, you're like, wow, there's so much to know now, and like you said, you can't unknow it once you know it, and then you need to take that information and make good decisions, and move forward. And I was looking through some of the information about your past and some of your accomplishments, and I mean, there's so much there, and you've just had such a fabulous career. And one of the milestones is still, I think, holds strong. I could be wrong, but you're one of the only women that's ever gone down 2,000 or 1,250 feet below sea level. Is that still a world record or a record out there for women?
What was special about that was that no one had been solo at that depth without a tether back to the surface. I mean, man or
Ah.
woman. It was not
Hmm.
gender thing. And then with the using the little deep rover submersible that I had a hand in helping to develop it, that we launched in 1986 for solo dives to 1,000 meters, half a mile
Wow.
down,
Wow.
was at that time, um, no one had been that deep solo. Now, of course, James Cameron solo
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
2012 all the way to the deepest part of the ocean. And since then, Victor Vescovo has not only gone down to the deepest place solo, but he's
Wow.
taken others along with him. Now I think there are as many people who've been to the deepest part of the ocean at last as have been on the moon for a long time.
Wow.
A
Yeah.
dozen people left footprints on the moon, and
Yeah.
only two people had been to the deepest part of the ocean from 1960 to when Cameron went. That made three, and then along came Victor Vescovo. That made four.
It's
And
amazing.
now Victor has taken a number of people down, so more than a dozen have actually
That's
been. It's
well,
great.
that's great. That is great.
Well,
Well, when you look back on your career, Sylvia, what are you most proud of?
well, I that I'm still doing it, I guess. I don't see that. I'd rather look forward. I always do. It's the next expedition that excites me the most. The
Well,
next
that
one
is a
always
great attitude.
the best
Absolutely.
one. So
But I got to
I'm
imagine
just getting started.
the hope spots got have to be pretty special, near dear to your heart. All the protection that's gone on, and
Absolutely. Well, it's
yeah,
seeing others see and then spread the word to watch the 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 joy. There's no limit on how much joy the world can have. There might be a
that's right.
limit on how many fish we can take, but there's no limit on how much fun we can have in saving the world.
Absolutely. No, that's great. Well, what could parting shot here? What could an individual do to help restore the oceans?
I think the most important thing that anybody can do is look in the mirror and ask yourself, okay, so who am I? And no one is the same. I have a hard time telling somebody else what they can do because I don't know who you are exactly. But I know that you're good at something, or that you care about something, or that you know someone, or whatever it is, that just kind of do a self inventory. Where are where can I where what are my strengths? What have I got? Do you sing? Do you make music? Are you good with numbers? Are you good with kids? Are you a teacher? Are you a car mechanic? Whatever it is you do, build on that and realize that everything matters. It
Mhm.
all connects. And if you put in perspective and put in the forefront, the ocean keeps me alive. I'm going to do something to return the favor, to help keep the ocean alive. There are thousands of answers to that question. And
That's good.
you will do the most and you'll do the best by making your choice based on an assessment of you. A lot of people have big power, but everybody has some power. I
Hmm.
mean, we all have the superpower of knowing what could not be known before and of using it while there's still time.
No, that's great. No, that is amazing. That's a great take and great advice. I highly recommend for the listeners, if you haven't seen Sylvia's TED Talks, get online, get on YouTube, watch it. Very impressive. Congrats on that huge win and funding Mission Blue and all the good things that you've done there. I just awesome to see what you've been doing. And my goodness. It's been such an honor to have you come on the show and interview you and get to spend a little time with you and learn from what you've done in the past and what you're still doing today. And I really appreciate you coming on.
Well, see you underwater. How about that?
I would love that. That would be amazing. I haven't been out in the ocean in quite a while. The last time we were out was yeah, the Panama and Costa Rica trip that we took, and that was some beautiful area down there. So, well, thank you for coming on the show. We're going to get this out. Your book is coming out in November, correct? The new one's called Ocean: A Global Odyssey, right?
You can order it. You can pre-order it now and get it
Okay.
when it's still warm from the
Yeah,
press.
there we go. So, listeners, we'd like you to join in and look up and pre-order the book. We may even have a couple giveaways down the road to give away to listeners who have you might be a lucky one. But Sylvia, thanks for coming on. I'm looking forward to reading the book when it comes out. The pre-read I've seen is spectacular already, and the pictures, a lot of people like pictures in books, and I do, and oh, they're amazing, the ones I've seen so far. So I'm looking forward to this book and reading it and getting some more information from you on it. So thanks for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
All right, awesome. It's been great.